Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and today we're going to be showcasing Sadali and even looking at Gilgamesh the Scourgebreaker a little bit. We're going to be seeing him in battle a lot. I'm going to be testing against him a lot since I finally have him at 140 and I think 2 reincarnations under his belt. Sadali for most of this video is going to have no reincarnations, but I will point out when I get him to 10 because there is going to be some video of him at 10 reincarnations in this video.
クリスタルよ、どうか我らを導きたまえ。
But I think that Sadali is maybe best and most evocatively described, especially to people who've been playing this game for a little bit, by describing his abilities through the characters that he reminds me of. Because Sadali is kind of a chimeric mass of all of the best War of the Vision's abilities. He is similar to the following units. Ashen Mont. His LB generates a follow-up hit. He also has a lot of blind for evasion support, actually even more than Mont does. He can cancel follow-up hits, and he can remove haste, so this is just a lot of good stuff that makes Ashen Mont a big part of who he is. He doesn't have the unit attack resistance shredding, which is a big part of Mont. Doesn't necessarily have HP threshold, so there are some things missing here, but he has a lot of the best parts of Mont's kit. As for Cypher, he has one of Cypher's drawbacks, actually, and this is also similar to Shurika, who we'll talk about later, but he has no re-raise or courage, but big general barriers, the ability to absorb HP, and can inflict healing power down. Not quite as good as Cypher, but he can definitely do it, and this is, I guess, also a thing that Ashen Mont can do. So in other ways, like Ashen Mont, really. Then we have Sephiroth. So talking about his Shurika matchup, which we'll do a little bit later, it becomes really important to remember that he has both passive and supports that raise his all-elemental resistance, making him tankier into basically any matchup. He can also remove haste on hit, similar to One Wing Sephiroth, and has similar anti-AoE debuffs, although only in magic. But also has the AoE resistance penetration to actually back this up better for damage than Sephiroth can. Also, like most iterations, actually I think both iterations of Sephiroth, he has the ability to remove both re-raise and courage, making him really versatile in that, you know, he's coming into this fight without re-raise or courage, but much like the original Sephiroth, he can remove those from the opponents pretty well, so he can kind of bring them down to his level. He's a lot like Celeste, maybe, but aura tanks in general, in that he can reduce the AoE damage for units around him. So he's a strong anti-AoE unit that can also kind of apply these benefits to other characters, and this makes him a bit like Volke, who has this ability for unit attack resistance. He's the AoE version of that. And this makes him an interesting combination and also gives him a synergy with like Veritas of the Earth, who has general damage mitigation. It's not quite as strong as this AoE resistance, but if you stack these two together, then you can have impressively hard to damage units for any type of AoE damage because you're getting both types of damage reductions. He also reminds me a lot of Ferris, or maybe Black Witch Helena, but definitely Ferris. This is a lot more like Ferris because he has a sequence heal that activates around himself. It doesn't have the big area of effect that Helena's does, but much more like Ferris, he has the ability to cast this multiple times because it's not linked to a limit burst. And this makes him pretty effective at healing characters around him while doing some pretty serious damage because this comes on a skill that is already doing a lot. It's one of his blinding skills that does other things as well. And then he also reminds me of Risol, Howlet, the Heaven's Blade, and Winter Wrath, because not only can he give himself 50% damage absorb, but he can also grant this to allies around him as well. This buff also grants Human Killer, so it creates a package that's like an advanced version of Alphonse's TMR buff, Drain Glyph, but it's more versatile, as well as being the best way to boost the damage of follow-up skills for himself and his allies. So this is super powerful for him, and a really great way to boost other follow-up damage units, especially if you put them in first slots. They have a little bit of initial hate, he'll rush over and use this on them. So it's really amazing to give both Human Killer and this HP Absorb to a character like Ashen Mont, who benefits very strongly from it for a lot of the same reasons. It's also worth pointing out that previously, for all the characters I just mentioned, and for the Rubus Battle Dress, the strongest version of this ability only gave you 30% HP restore. This gives 50%. So while those other characters maybe didn't get a lot of credit for this ability, maybe because it just wasn't healing quite enough, I can speak for playing Rubus Battle Dress and it being really impactful. This is going to restore almost twice as much HP as the Rubus Battle Dress, so it's going to be very powerful. One thing I'm going to do in this video that you're going to see a little bit later when I bring Veritas of the Winds in is that I've got the Mystic Ward, the TMR from Durin, which gives Mystic Protection, which also gives 50% HP restore, and we can see that this enables Veritas of the Winds to work very much like characters like Joom, and Sadali is also going to give a buff that is very similar to that and very powerful. It's also worth noting, since I brought up Rissol, that supporting evasion through blinding is also a characteristic of her kit as well. And then the last character that he reminds me of is Shurika. Yeah, Shuri has follow-up hit. I mean, that is a similarity, but it activates in a different way than hers. The way that he's really similar to her is that they're both self-healing units, and they have 50% base curse resistance. So they're incredibly hard to curse, so it's really hard to punish their HP restore capabilities unless you're using healing power down, and quite a lot of it, because they are very healing heavy characters. Then he does a number of other things that don't necessarily remind me of other characters, or I just didn't want to look up different characters to do this. I don't necessarily think there's anybody who can lower the buff enhancement rate, which is pretty cool. This is basically going to weaken your opponent's ability to buff themselves. So this is kind of like the inverse of debuff weakening. You're actually weakening their buffs instead of weakening their debuffs. Similar effect. He can also lower reaction block rate pretty effectively. He has the ability to remove a lot of things. I've mentioned several of them already, but a few that I haven't mentioned is he has two skills, actually, that remove shell. One that removes general magic resistance, not magic attack resistance, but just resistance to magic in general, which is very powerful and is getting relatively common on newer units. He can also remove all buffs from characters and AP auto restore. So, haste, AP auto restore, healing power punishment, follow-up attack punishment. Basically, every one of the meta mechanics can be removed by this guy. Talking about his Shurika matchup, we're going to see some Shurika matchups a little bit later on in this, but people expect him to be weaker here, and it's not his best matchup, but it is also shockingly evenly matched, at least between these two characters. After buffing, they can both resist each other's elements by about 30% or more, so their follow-up non-elemental hits will do relatively more damage and become more important to the duration of the fight. If anything, this makes Sadali's ability to cancel her follow-up hit a nice edge in this matchup. Especially on Earth teams, he's likely to be the best suited member of the team into several different types of Wind matchup. Now, I'm not saying that this team, especially as an Earth team, is going to do good into Wind, but it's certainly going to do a lot better than you would expect, and Sadali staying alive means that he might be able to heal your other characters and keep them in the game too, and especially if you're using other aura tanks like, I don't know, Veritas of the Earth has some serious problems into Shurika and maybe into Dario as well, so that could be a little bit of an issue, but you know, if you can reduce enough damage and then heal enough with him, then I've absolutely seen a number of matches where he'll stabilize and be able to 1v3 or 1v2 or something, a couple of Wind units, or he'll get to the point where it's down to the Wind unit and he'll just keep his team alive because one Wind unit can't take them all down, especially since they're going to be relying on AoE skills to really even the balance to make that comeback, and he's going to stop them from making that comeback with his aura. So he can really stabilize your team. If you can take out one of the Wind units earlier, then maybe you have a chance in a 3v2 to just absolutely shut them down. It's not his best matchup, and we're going to see it a couple times in this video, but he does really well into it, a lot better than you would think, and I think especially off of a Wind team, or off of an Earth team, he's really going to have basically no weaknesses to wind. He's not going to be able to damage them as quickly, but he is a high damage unit, so he should be able to hurt them relatively well. He also has a non-elemental follow-up, which should help with elemental resistances, but he's also going to take damage from them really slowly because of the elemental resistances like Sephiroth. This also means that if he can get his elemental resistances to his weak element up to like 30% easily, then that also means that he can probably get his strong element, lightning, up to at least 50% without even really building him that hard to do it. So, really good character in a lot of matchups, and just has a lot of keys to defeating basically everything in the meta. This guy wrecks the meta, and I love it. I don't think he's exactly OP because there are still some weaknesses here, but he is an incredibly well-balanced and versatile unit, and definitely isn't as weak to Shurika as people may have initially thought. That last matchup was versus my Pierce team. This is going to be versus the Black Mage team. Sadali has a little bit of innate resistances to magic in this similar but not nearly as strong of a way as Shurika does. However, he does get a good amount of magic resistance on every third turn due to passive, in a very similar way similar but maybe less helpful way as Veritas of the Flames gets that attack boost every 3 turns. So at least every third turn of his, he is going to be really tanky to magic out of nowhere. And maybe that's this one, I think. We probably are lining up around his third turn, so he may take more magic damage after this. But this has got him in range, so here we are with the LB. This is going to get us our follow-up hit, and this might be enough to take out Helena? It was. Okay, yeah, we just barely pushed over that damage cap, and in addition to that, that was likely in part because of that human killer buff, like really boosting that damage, because there's very few ways to actually boost that damage, and human killer will definitely do it. And as you boost that, you're also increasing the likelihood that those follow-up attacks will be able to counter things like re-raise. Whereas sometimes they don't do quite enough damage, so the follow-up still leaves them alive to retaliate or to be healed, or whatever might happen. But we've got this down to a 3v1, and yes, Shurika certainly is powerful. She did miss Mont there, because she is blinded, and that's certainly helping. Sadali has a lot of skills that blind, and one of those skills that blind you just saw, and it's also going to heal things around him. So even if you're in say a more evasive matchup, where you have a more accurate unit, you can break down their accuracy and also heal back the damage that they did before you broke their accuracy with blindness in the same move. It's really quite helpful. And that's his sequence heal. So it does quite a lot of beneficial things and can really help you in pushing this team more evasive, especially against teams that aren't really having the highest resistance for blind. And there aren't too many of those because blind isn't often that impactful. And you don't often run like blind resistance on your trust runes unless you're going for like a hyper accurate build without guaranteed hits. So this team is a little bit awkward, and we're going to see one interaction that's basically a negative synergy on the opposing side. I mean, it does have a benefit, like it does work in a way, but not necessarily a good one, not an optimal one. This is actually a negative synergy. But if you look at this team, you'll notice that this team is one that would do really good into Shurika. We have the Reflect. We have an ice tank, even though she's more of a versus physical-oriented one. She herself has a lot of really well-rounded resistances, so she has good resistances into magic. She has also good unit attack resistance naturally, and that's going to help her out a lot with the follow-up hit damage and help keep that low for her. And then you have Gilgamesh, who is going to be able to not only like ignore Shurika's physical barrier, but also shred into her with like huge damage. You can probably one-tap her very easily, and for a character that doesn't necessarily have courage or re-raise, that's really going to move her from the board as soon as she gets in Gilgamesh's range, essentially, and that's very bad for her matchup. So either defensively or offensively, we have two proactive units here that can take out Shurika basically in one hit, and that's pretty cool, both with magic damage. In one case, her own magic damage. And of course, this whole team is going to ignore her physical barrier as well. How are they doing against Sadali, though? Well, they don't resist him nearly as well, but they are staying alive long enough to be blinded. Now, they both do have some guaranteed hit in their kits. It is maybe a little bit more awkward for them. Definitely limits what they can do, but it doesn't mean that they can't hit the opponent. But as you can see, against a non-Shurika team, that's not exactly the best. But then again, there were very few, there was basically only one matchup that I found, other than just like straight up wind, that they lost super consistently. So watch me here as I set up my initial placement. This is a good little tutorial for how to do that. There's a lot of basic strategies where you just kind of put them around an open point in the center, and this is going to give them like two points that they can buff both of their allies at, no matter who is the fastest. And then you can think about, like, when you know how fast they are, you can think about, right, if you want to hold back and buff a little bit more, you can make the fastest unit the one that's up front, and that means their first movement will be to come back and buff their allies, instead of, say, buffing their allies and then running off and forward. So this is going to help keep Mont back a little bit, and help get Veritas of the Earth up front. Mont's going to be right up on him, and so is Sadali. So we're going to be having two consecutive AoE resistance auras. One for AoE and one for general damage. And these three characters are very AoE damage oriented, so this is going to be a really good test of how much Sadali can turn people's damage down. And so far it's working pretty well, although it's kind of inconclusive against Veritas of the Earth because he has that physical barrier as well. But we have broken through that now with an AoE. We have a lot of like AoE resistance penetration here with Veritas of the Earth, so he can actually deal with this aura pretty well. But so does Sadali potentially. He can have a good bit of AoE resistance penetration on himself as well, especially if you're using Chariot as your Esper. So he could also counterplay himself and his own aura by having good AoE resistance penetration. It would still slow down AoE damage a little bit. And we're seeing that because, you know, they're definitely not able to do much more damage than we can heal. So we're incredibly defensively stalwart, but we also have really good potential for healing all the way across the board. The only one real downside is that I really wish maybe a map where you could isolate Veritas of the Earth in the beginning, because he's going to have the initial hate, and that's going to mean that Sadali wants to buff him. But you really want Sadali to give the HP absorb and the human killer to Mont. This is the stats of my previous team, by the way. This is the one I just showed you, and this is the one I'm going to be switching to. We'll see some differences, but Mont has a whole hell of a lot of attack here. You know, these other two characters look comparatively weak compared to an over 2,000 attacking stat. So here we are, and this team is pretty formidable. It's very close to the team that gave this team the most trouble, which I'm going to be showing you fairly shortly. I had to level up Sadali to 10 reincarnations to even compete with that team, and it didn't go particularly well. And this team is going to do pretty good too. The notable difference between the two teams is that the win unit here is Dario instead of Shurika, and this actually allows me a little bit more power in my vision cards, because I'm not trying to make a team that can accommodate Red Mage, Katana, and Black Mage simultaneously, I can just focus on a very powerful synergy here between Katana and Red Mage. So in some cases, these characters are going to be more powerful even than the strongest team that I'm showing you, just because I was able to build them up more through their VCs. Whereas on the other team, I was forced to use a lot more general VCs in a number of cases, or VCs that only work for 2 out of 3 characters on the team. But one thing you're going to notice is that Dario resists this guy really, really well. He has an initial HP barrier for magic, which is going to help him a lot. That's also going to reduce the chance, because if Sadali's initial hit doesn't deal damage, he can't do follow-up damage. So for Dario, if he can resist, and he's good at earth resistance too, if he can resist that initial earth attack coming in magic and if he can stop that from hitting higher than 7,500, then he's also going to stop the follow-up attack. So he can really blunt Sadali's damage pretty well, but he's also going to be hitting the people around Dario, who are going to have spirit up because of Dario's aura. So once again, Dario can kind of keep people around him safe from Sadali as well. So you're just going to have a lot harder time attacking into Dario. That being said, the thing that I think ultimately holds this team back the most is that it just doesn't have the just all-on offense that its other Shurika variant does. We're going to be seeing that one soon. So here's our next team. This is my Earth Aggro team. Bradley is an incredible chainer and chains incredibly well with Mont. There isn't as much opportunity for that outside of Earth chaining. I mean, he can still build an Earth chain for Sadali to follow up on pretty well. So he's really going to be here to help me ramp my damage. And I'm going to try this against the same team since it at least did fairly well. We'll see if it does better against this one. Once again, setting Mon up front so that he comes back a bit. It allows other characters to get up front a little bit more. But he is by far the fastest unit. Well, not by far, but he's by a significant bit the fastest unit on this team. So even with those 2 units getting ahead of them, he's just going to run up right between them and probably outpace them by the time it comes to blows, which is exactly what I want. We have our elemental resistances up on Sadali, in addition to basically his full buff rotation. And that should mean that we have Man-Eater on him and Mont, and that we also have, and you can see there, they took more damage from the follow-up hit. Gilgamesh has a very strong follow-up hit, but he took more damage from the follow-up hit in non-elemental than he did from the elemental hit. So Mon should be able to heal pretty tremendously off of his attacks here. So I'm not super worried about him taking damage. As long as he can take a damage relatively slowly, we should be fine. Although double frostbite is a bit of a problem. It's not as much of a problem for Sadali, and in most forms of my builds for this team, we're using Ashen Blessing in addition to Divine Blessing to give him AP cost down as well. So even if Mont, after some AP restore, so he's built up to maybe 100 AP, if he can get that AP cost down on, he might not even be that badly influenced by Frostbite. It's not really a problem for Sadali at all because he has a high starting AP amount, but it will be a problem for Bradley, though he is pretty AP efficient himself in a lot of ways. But as you could see, we still managed to overwhelm because while they did pretty good damage and had a pretty good matchup into us, they just couldn't take our characters all the way off the board. You can definitely win with very low HP. It's that last HP that's the most important. That's how courage works, right? So checking out these resistances here, this is what I mean by having a really great base for wind resistance. But also a really great base for lightning resistance. The slash resistance was also pretty decent. So let's set up our initial placement here. This is a really easy formation. It's it's not always the best formation. There are some times where you might want something else. But it is pretty versatile on the maps that you can find 3 spaces in roughly that configuration. And that's most maps. So this is a pretty good go-to if you aren't sure what else to do. It's a pretty good starting point that you may adjust from if you need to keep somebody back a little bit further, or maybe need somebody to go in a certain place on the map. Like, for whatever reason in this match, maybe he's being baited a bit by Elda here or something. Mont is going to the wrong exit. It's kind of a problem, because it's leaving Sadali over here to like 1v3 the team while Mont gets stuck in the back row. But the other problem is that Rinoa isn't very proactive in moving forward either, so I mean, I guess she'll help him when he needs a heal. Maybe she'll run to him to give him haste now. But only now is Mont really entering the fray. Oh, no! No, we got an LB. I think she's only going to be able to hit Elda, but that could be pretty strong. He does have haste active, so removing that was good. Also, he's poisoned. I don't think we did any damage. His general damage barrier kept that from happening, but not the poison. Okay, lost some decent HP. About, you know, maybe the damage that you might expect from a follow-up hit or a counter-attack. Look at that heal. Too bad he couldn't heal anyone around him, but also the rest of my team doesn't need healing. This used to be one of the best self-healing teams in the game around the time that Joom came out. Okay, maybe with the right stuff on... Okay, Folka not necessarily. I think the best self-healing when Joom came out would have included Ferris instead because of that sequence heal. But you can just see that they are absolutely getting stomped by this team. And they're finding it really hard to keep damage on them. See, the thing about pressure is pressure isn't just damage. Pressure is being able to overwhelm with damage. To be able to do a lot of damage at once in such a way that people can't deploy their countermeasures in between, because keeping up pressure really requires you to overwhelm. If they're healing back pretty consistently, it doesn't matter if the water team deals a ton of damage to us, we're going to heal back our full life total time and time again. This is an example of a little bit different of a formation and a way of changing a formation to kind of keep something from happening. I want to force Mont to stay over on this side, and I know he's not going to try to buff from the higher position, so he's going to run back behind them to buff them, and even being a little bit further away from them and having like less affinity, he's still going to be the fastest unit on the team and able to rush in for this buff, even though he's a little bit further from people. And this will also make him faster from this point on than he was starting out. Also makes them faster too. And, you know, now all affinity is 10, unless you have affinity turned off, so it's either 10 or 0. But I play with the affinity on because I want the, you know, there are some AI side effects because the AI kind of wants to use affinity to make itself stronger. But that also means that you're standing closer together, it causes some bunching. But that's not always a problem, especially when you have like aura units, like AoE aura units, or Celeste, or, you know, characters that don't mind, or in fact were designed to deal with these bunching issues. You definitely want affinity on there. But honestly, I never turn it off, even though there are technically some benefits. I don't think at this point in the game you necessarily need to do that. Alright, Mont's coming in, getting his follow-up active. We only have one character, though. And he healed back for all that. Now we have poisoned him, which I don't know if he offhand has a way to regen, but that could cure that. Got another follow-up hit active. Because Dario didn't take damage there, because of his HP barrier, he did not... Oh, he Berserk Mont. Okay, that's slightly better. Because that HP barrier, he didn't take the follow-up hit. As I've said, this can make it really difficult for Sadali to open into Dario. So now we've got a 3v1. Luckily, I'm still kind of in my early turns with Sadali on this map, so he should have pretty good elemental resistances. But he's also about to lose those soon, so he's going to have to find some other way to stay alive. And healing himself and blinding their most accurate unit seems to be the way he's looking to go. Look like we have a Spine Shatter dive coming for him. Dario was going for, I believe, the disable there. Ooh, no, she did hit him, and wow. Was that 7,000 damage with her follow-up hit? That's ridiculous. She's scary. So that's one of the teams that we fear, is just solid wind. Dario specifically is the tank. I don't know how Duran would deal with him necessarily. He should be pretty neutral into Duran. Duran mainly deals with defense, penetration, and slash penetration. He's neither of those things. It's a magic, I think magic attack unit, yeah. Maybe a little bit of missile. A lot of energies have missile in there, but I don't think his kit does, necessarily. So, here we are with the... Dang, I just spaced on her name, man. Melnia. Melnia, I'm sorry, maybe not her name, her designation. Melnia. The unit Melnia. The simulacra Melnia, perhaps. Anyways, she has some pretty neat benefits. She can give the whole team protect, and she starts attacking from good range. She has a lot of status effects, and I should probably turn up her faith a bit. But she does pretty often get that poison on her LB, which, I don't know about you, I think it looks pretty cool. I like that you can see the interaction between the two character models in the LB, because LBs are actually rendered in-game, so like, you see how the character models will change if you have like AP restore or poison. You can see some of those statuses on them, or one of the most recent or relevant, and you'll actually still see that in the LBs and stuff. And you can see that on the character you're attacking in the LB too. So I love it when they include both character models in there. So she's definitely going to have a problem with this. Veritas Evans himself wasn't enough to overwhelm them. Mont, at least initially, is pretty good into physical. And Sadali just shrugged off the damage for a lot of reasons. It's like, nah, I don't really care. Now, oh, she's trying to bump herself up in turn order. Nope, we definitely beat that one. So let's see what's next. Try a Veritas team. See how that works. The All Veritas teams have not been working out very well. I think there's only like one combination of them running 3 Veritas. It was the one that I mentioned in a post about Veritas of the Flames, which I think is Flames, Earth, and Heavens, that actually has a job vision card that works for all 3 of them. There's only one that fits for like any set of them, and still it's only one. It's a good basis, but it's a strong card. And it really works well into the team design, but yeah. So for that reason, while these are great units that do work well together and do interesting things together, they don't always perform very well against meta teams because they're really being held back by their lack of synergy in element and their lack of synergy in job. They're just, in both ways, all over the place. So your VCs, you just don't get good choices for them. And that's a significant portion of their power, really. And when we talk about pressure, if your power is, underwhelming, then there are thresholds that a slightly more powerful version of the same unit would hit that you just aren't. You aren't able to apply enough pressure to them to really get it going. Okay, Spine Shatter Dive coming from Veritas of the Heavens. Veritas of the Earth is like 2v1ing our damage dealers over here quite impressively. I'm also maybe a little bit impressed that Bradley survived that attack. That was pretty strong. Oh my gosh. Sadali's just showing off. So he cleared out the tank and healed his partner up. Like a bamf. Mont's doing okay damage to Veritas of the Heavens now. We've got a Odin. So that's going to be like a general damage boost, I think. Also critical hit rate up, I believe. Not quite enough for Mont to get through him, though. But Sadali wasn't in range to do damage, so he put his physical shield up and gave him HP Absorb and Man-Eater. So now we're just going to be doing our best damages. Except that we've already, for both of these units, used their LBs, so like the follow-up hit effects of that aren't really going to help as much. This is a matchup that I've been interested in because one of the ways that Veritas of the Earth interacts with a lot of other curse units is that through his HP barrier, kind of in the same way that we were talking about with Dario earlier, if you can't deal damage to him, then you can't curse him, which means that Sephiroth here is going to have to wait for either the other physical units to deal enough damage to him, or he's going to have to wait for that barrier to be broken for him to even have a chance to curse him. And he's only got one shot. He tends to use it early. He likes to shoot his shot as soon as he can. So it is very likely that in this match, Sephiroth will attempt to curse Veritas of the Earth, but be unsuccessful. However, even though there is an elemental advantage here, if Ramada can get in range of him, and use her curse ability, the one that she just used, but on Veritas of the Earth, that will also remove his HP barrier, and she will have the ability to curse him. But not only that, after that point, with that barrier gone, Sephiroth will have the ability to curse him. But no, he's still sitting at full health. This team is tough, and it requires a lot of pressure to be able to work through, especially this version. And this is a level 120 Veritas of the Earth, mind you. I'm kind of angry at limited guild battle right now. Because with limited guild battle, I haven't been earning the daily Veritas of the Earth and Bolt medals, which is frustrating. Because I am 5 away from 140ing this guy on this account. And again, the AoE resistance and the general damage resistance, especially against teams like that, well, with the exception of Mont, this is a very AoE damage heavy team. So, you're mitigating that across the team pretty well. That being said, Mont's getting his butt kicked here. Not their Mont, my Mont. And they have managed to land the curse on Veritas of the Earth. Also, he has managed to land the defense penetration down on them. They've berserked him, so he has no chance of healing himself back anymore. Oh, follow-up damage took took out Mont's courage, took Ramada down to courage, healed Sadali back to full, like it wasn't even a problem. But now it's a 2v1 Sadali versus the curse units. He should be able to take out Ramada quite easily, but will his damage be enough to take out Sephiroth? It was not, even with the follow-up. But he got the heal. He's nearly full health again. He got another turn, oh my god. And he blinded Sephiroth before taking him out with his follow-up damage, but that didn't leave any follow-up damage for that re-raise. And now he's back. He's healed himself. He's blind again. He's almost dead, under 1,000 HP, but Sadali is almost healed back up to full. And with a retribution, with a retaliation shot, he has taken Sephiroth down. So this guy's really solid. But this was the team that gave him the most trouble. Very, very troubling team for him. And I'm going to face it with 3 of the teams that I've shown you so far. But this is my initial placement. I want Mont to move up to buff them from the back, essentially. And this is a little bit more of an open formation, instead of them being kind of locked in a pattern where it doesn't matter. It really matters that Mont is the fastest unit, because if one of the other units moves first, they won't be able to get the other 2 in range. At least, unless they have Diamond AoE buffs. That's another thing that's cool about Melnia. Like, her initial buff is a Diamond AoE, so it doesn't really matter where she is, as long as she can get relatively close to the other 2 characters. So we got our buffs up. We also have a physical shield on Rinoa, which could be helpful, but this match often comes down to Shurika at the very least, which it's not going to be helpful for that. But this kind of puts her in a similar situation. She's not tanky, mind you. Doesn't heal her. Well, she does heal herself okay, as long as someone else needs healing, I guess. But this kind of puts her in a similar start to Veritas of the Earth, in that she's going to be able to take physical damage pretty well for a bit. Although he has, like, immense defense. I think with a guard smite, some of my builds of Veritas of the Earth have been able to, with that attack as a buff, essentially, get to 100 defense or higher. At least very close. So here comes the limit burst from Sadali. Follow-up damage. We are doing a lot of damage to Gilgamesh, but not quite enough. And this is a very low reincarnation Gilgamesh, and this should also be somewhat of an indication of why reincarnation can matter a lot for him. Because if we had pushed him just a little bit harder, we could have got that courage sooner, and then our follow-up damage would have KO'd him, instead of hoping that one of our other characters can do it before he gets a chance to screw with us. But also, this gives him an opportunity to heal back, and now he's at about half health. And we're also taking damage. Also, Mont, who does have AP cost down, which is helpful, and does have a good little trunk load of AP, is frostbitten. And now he died. But also, Sadali's down too. She took both of those very easily. And on this map especially, it seems like Sadali is getting in range just a little bit later, and so is Shurika. So it's pushing him just a little bit outside of his elemental resistance buff. Which is meaning that, unlike what I was saying earlier when I was talking about his matchup with Shurika, if you get to her quickly, it's a balanced matchup to potentially a good matchup for Sadali for a couple of reasons. If you get to her late, it gets to be a lot worse of a matchup for Sadali. It gets to be a lot more one-sided. He does have some technical advantages that help make it a little bit more even, but no, he has some serious problems here. Also worth noting, again, I don't like Veritas of the Earth on this team, if not for just the one reason that initial hate keeps Sadali from buffing Mont correctly. There's probably ways that I could deal with that, potentially. But it is a little bit frustrating. Especially with initial placement. I could just place him a little bit out of range and have him run forward. He loves to run forward. He doesn't really have buddy buffs. So that could work. You know. Because Sadali should do it if Veritas of the Earth is out of range, even if he has more hate. But it is a little unfortunate. Also worth pointing out that while Sadali's not an evasive unit, he is yet another Earth unit that is kinda evasive, much like Bradley, much like Mont himself. But he also has a pretty potent accuracy buff and is a fairly accurate unit himself as well. So, in terms of accuracy and evasion, he's a little bit of a Sadali of all trades and master of none. He has a decent start into either one, and if you want to build him for either one, he can... Well, okay, building him for evasion might be a little bit harder. You're really leaning on him getting blind off, but he does have it on 2 of the skills in his kit, so it shouldn't be too hard for him to blind people. But he would really, even in your best case scenario, he would only be evasive at all after that. And really his maximum benefit with that would be to the other characters on the team who are more evasive. Like, Halloween Lucio would be a really good combination with him, because if you can blind someone and get Halloween Lucio, as long as they don't have guaranteed hits, there's probably no chance that they're going to hit him. And Sadali would be competent, and also Halloween Lucio himself, both of them would be competent enough healers, or self-healers, or be able to be made into a competent enough self-healer, that some of the weaker guaranteed hit attacks that a lot of characters would be limited to just don't apply enough pressure. Sure, you can hit them, but you can't hit them hard. You got to use the weakest thing in your kit. In some cases, there are some characters with some really good guaranteed hit, and one of the characters that's not showing up in this video, although I could afford him and I could make a glove team around him with Renoa that might be okay. I just don't really want to invest in the Crimson Wizard, but you know, he's got a lot of guaranteed hit in his kit and is decently accurate, although I don't think it's accurate as Sadali. But he doesn't need to be, because he has so much guaranteed hit in his kit. That's another character that we're not talking about here. And he would actually still play really well into that scenario, even if Sadali lands his blind. So, in some ways, the Crimson Wizard might be one of the counters for this. Also, gotta point out, we get a lot of status in this particular fight because of Melnia. And it also gives us, like, one of our better openings, really. And that's in part because she starts applying the pressure even sooner. And just kind of survives just long enough that this gives us a bit of a damage advantage, but also allows us to stay back a bit. Now, because Sadali could have got that KO, we applied enough pressure that Sadali could have got that KO if he had been further up, if we hadn't started engaging earlier, and therefore he could have opened with his LB and got the follow-up hit. But we've got him down now. That's going to be Melnia's last contribution to this fight. Shurika nukes her. But Melnia also managed, her other contribution to the fight was sleeping Sephiroth, which skipped one of his turns. We've got our stuff going on, and now he's coming after us. He's not doing a lot of damage to Sadali. Sadali, as you would imagine, has pretty decent fire resistance, at least maybe at this point. But not necessarily the best magic resistance or wind resistance. And I'm guessing it wasn't a turn multiple of 3, because that seemed like it did a good bit of damage to him. So maybe even his elemental resistance buff was down, but Sephiroth just doesn't do a ton of damage. Although I think in this build he actually has the higher offensive stat of all 3 characters. He's close to 2k on this build, whereas they're both at like 1500. Yeah. there's a pretty weird amount of power in this team, despite it being a bit janky, and I will show you that team right now. So Gilgamesh has really, really positive resistances across the board. Shurika has a really high resistance to slash on this build, good resistance to magic as well, or at least okay. Good slash resistance for Sephiroth, good elemental resistances across the board. But as you can see, we have a couple of things where we have some duplicate effects, and we have some things that only apply to a couple of characters. This whole VC setup was a little bit more janky, and I think there were probably a couple of specific vision cards that would have made it less janky. But there's Gilgamesh and his base stats. And while I continue to build up this Veritas of the Flames concept with some new units and try to conceptualize how this team could work, because I think it could be cool. Addison Rae is one of the ways of solving the how to give Shurika courage or re-raise question. And Shurika makes a good combination with Human Killer, or Man-Eater, which our gentle giant, not so gentle giant than the armor can give her. So I think it makes a good utilization of her. I'm not getting as much slash resistance in this build as I was in the meme team because of some of the cards that work for that specifically that I'm not using here. But I'm going to try to adjust for that as I remind you to like and subscribe, but also to leave a comment and tell me what you're thinking down there in the comments. If you're a newer player looking for a guild, Sylkis has openings, and we're willing to take you. That's Sylkis, like Sylkis Greens from Final Fantasy lore. We are the Sylkis Greens, as a matter of fact, of wotv lore. That's us. We're even friendly to newer players as long as you're willing to contribute or at least turn on auto proxy and set your guild battle teams. And if you want to get more Veritas of the Earth medals, we are located in the top 400 or so, or between the top 4 and 500. So we get decent medals. If you're a more experienced player or a more long-time player and have like a deeper roster, then we could use you over at Gasol Union. These are named after the Gasol Greens, but we're also in a union with the Empire series of guilds. So this even has opportunities to get into some other guilds, potentially, because you would be a part of an Empire guild, and that might even be able to someday get you into, I think it's Sirijawa? And by the way, shout out to them. I'll have to put this on the screen for a second. I noticed you guys, number of you guys, got the highest damage for individual guild raid bosses, and that is really cool because I think that's like kind of the ultimate test of all aspects of this game. Like, in some ways, guild raids are kind of like the pinnacle of how much could you theoretically do, because it kind of like, it doesn't hold you back the way that the mix of offense and defense of guild battle does. It just says like, how hard could you hit that damage cap though, and how strategically. Well, anyways, on your way down to the comments, be sure to check out the link in the description as I Elder Awaken some vision cards. Also pick out some MR vision cards that are good for Elder Awakening too. Click that link to see ways to support the channel, both on Patreon and Ko-fi. to help make this a little bit more worth my time, because these videos tend to be long. Not only am I recording for a while to get the footage, but I'm not going to complain about that. I enjoy playing the game. But it does end up with a lot of footage to edit, even when I speed it up. So, if you want to give me some appreciation for that time, you can throw me a couple bucks in one of those. But you could also buy one or more of my books. I write in fantasy and science fiction and kind of modern day cyberpunk-esque themes. If those are the type of things you want, especially a modern day cyberpunk type theme, then go for It Even Happens While We Sleep. The hardback is $15 right now, which is a great price. Amazon's making a lot of money off of it, but I'm making a couple dollars for each one. So, think of that as a donation. And if you're trying to donate $10, maybe buy 4 books for your family this Christmas. Oh man, it is what it is. It's not a great way to make money, but I enjoy writing. So hopefully you'll see that enjoyment in the work itself. And with all that being said, there's just one last thing to do. And that's to say thank you so much for tuning in. And I'll see you in the next one.